Hello, everybody. I hope you're receiving. So apologies for the slight delay. I had problems getting the camera to work, and let's hope that doesn't happen again. Um, I'm okay, just to introduce myself, just yeah, making sure that I've got the comment feed going. That's good. Okay, yeah. Um, right. All seems to be working. Good. Okay. So yeah, I'm Fiona Moore. I'm the second of the readers in the BSFA Vector Reading Series tonight, and it's really good to see you all. Um, we're having quite a Canadian reading tonight because I'm not in Toronto, I'm from Toronto. I've been living in the UK for 23 years, came over here to study, and then they offered me a job. What can I say? I've been writing for quite a few and actually pub- publishing seriously since about 2011. Um, and what I'm going to read to you today is my short story, The Little Car Dreams of Gasoline, which is also published in a Canadian magazine on spec. So it's the cultural experience today. I It was published in 2016, and one reason that I'm reading it is because what I seem to be best known for is my stories about self-driving cars, intelligent technology, and people living with them. The elevator pitch is that my feeling is in the future. Uh, Robots will not be our masters, they will not be our slaves, they will be our co-workers. But with all the problems that entails, and this was the first story in which I actually explored it. And part of where I was coming from in this is that my day job is as an anthropologist. And so I started thinking, in the future, if intelligent technology becomes more and more of a daily reality for people, we're going to need people who study it. Oh, and yes, this is going to happen. I have two cats. They are very worried about me talking to screens. So there will be feline photobombing undoubtedly at several points because they think they do not think it's healthy that I spend so much time talking to screens. So anyway, as I said, I was thinking about the sort of people who would study cars and smart houses and things like that. And so I came up with the idea of the profession of autologists, like anthropologists, but for automobiles. And so my first story was considering how an anthropologist for cars would relate to cars. And this kind of developed later on, exploring this in more and more different ways in different stories, and indeed, finally, in a novel, Driving Ambition, which I will also hold up before the end of the chat. So, yeah, so again, if you're watching, you can comment on the page, and I'll take comments and questions after the reading. And whether live or not, I'd like to do a shout out to family members of mine who are I happen to know listening in from Canada, and especially to my nephew who I'm will be, if he's not listening live, will be listening later. So hello. Okay, right. How are we doing for time? And well, yeah, I think maybe I shall encourage the cat to leave the room because I can't hold the book with him on it, and I shall begin the story. Published in, as I said, in On Spec, the Canadian magazine of the fantastic, um, issue 103, volume 27, number 4. And the story is called The Little Car Dreams of Gasoline. They say it's bad publicity, Ruth explained, and it's scaring off customers. You'd think, I countered, that they'd consider it viral advertising. Ruth perched on the edge of my desk, striking a Tinkerbell pose as she did so, though the real reason she perched was obvious to anyone who'd heard the story of her accident. Problem with that sort of viral advertising, it can't be controlled. On the one hand, you've got the whole Herbie, Kit, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang meme of the lovable talking car. On the other hand, well, you've got Christine. There's already stories about it deliberately running people over. Any of them true? Ruth made a face. Jason! Course not. Snopes has got a page a mile long. She uncrossed her legs and swung her feet back and forth. I'm not an unfit guy. I jog, I eat salads. My BMI's a bit on the heavy side, but nothing that worries my doctor. But Ruth, reconstructed vertebral column notwithstanding, always had this kind of weird pixie energy that made me feel exhausted. So like I said, what's the problem? I drawled, wishing she'd take her swinging feet elsewhere. Head office cares so little about the thing that nobody even notices it's driven off until it's halfway to Canada. Then, when they do, they don't do anything for weeks, and only now that it's got its own Wikipedia entry and Snopes page do they want to shut the thing down. Ruth sighed. Ours not to reason why. If head office are control freaks, then we have to bring this thing in. Me, because I was on the prototype design team and so built its brains. You, because you're the golden boy autologist of the moment, after heading up the team on the Verve 2500 series. And a nice big EMP generator. What? Ruth mimed a gun. It's been riding down around to the east of us, but word on the street is it's coming back this way. When it does, we target it and blam. It won't be functional, of course, but at least it won't be a publicity nightmare. Can't we just stop it recharging? Tried that, Ruth said. It's pretty smart. Every time we change its access code to a recharging station, it hacks the new code. It knows to go to unmanned charging stations too, and usually in the middle of the night. Hooks itself up on the current and it's off again in minutes. I'd call it sneaky, if that weren't too anthropomorphic even for one of those. If we've got to kill it, I said, then why don't we just fly out to where it is and do it? It's the way head office's mind works, Ruth said. They're scared of bad publicity from what this thing does, but they're also scared of bad publicity if its fans find out it got assassinated by its own creators. So they reckon the best thing is to wait till it's on our property, then just put it away quietly. The car's gone, the legend lives on, win-win. How about if, before that, we try and figure out why it's doing this, I said. You say it was a perfectly normal self-drive prototype? Still is, Ruth said. Nothing out of the ordinary. The structure is normal. The software is the same that we installed in all the prototypes. I shook my head. Can't be. It must have been buggy. Swear to God, Ruth said. And I further swear it still is. How do you know? Because it's a prototype. Ruth looked at me like the idiot I was being. Onboard computer transmissions come back to the office, remember? Everything logged. You mean, I said, that all the while it's been out there driving around in the... I bit back a worse expletive, remembering that we were in public. Goddamn continent. Every move it's made has been logged? How do you think Snopes has been countering the rumors? Ruth shrugged. And still nobody here noticed? Nobody was tasked to check its feed, Ruth countered. Everybody just assumed it was sitting in the barn until it wasn't. If we're in contact with the thing, why don't we just shut it down from here? Because the transmitter doesn't work in reverse, Ruth said. We're logging what it's doing, what it's thinking. We can't transmit back along the stream and tell it to quit. We have to go out there with our elephant gun. Okay, I said placatingly. It's logged, so you can tell if the software was buggy or if there was anything wrong with the program. Ruth nodded. Nothing wrong with it. It's doing exactly what it was programmed to do, which means whatever's made it run off, drive around like this, is some unknown part of the normal software. And I can add, she said, that whatever head office wants, I personally wouldn't mind knowing why. The idea was intriguing, and I found myself thinking of it later that day when monitoring some of the new Verve 3000s undergoing cultural development. At this stage, they could learn on their own, and I just sat in the observation booth and watched as they raced back and forth around the testing area, communicating to each other in lightning-fast cryptic bursts. My mind drifted, and I found myself looking up documents on the development of self-drive cars on my tablet. The first cars, obviously, were just programmed like any other machines. Pause for feline removal. Sorry about that. The first cars, obviously, were programmed like any other machines, sort of a glorified satellite navigation system. Even then, though, there was the learning element, programming in knowledge, teaching the computer what to do in different situations. Then came the early experiments with artificial intelligence, developing a car which could react to crises, learn from experience. Teams of anthropologists, psychologists, teachers. Ruth had been involved with those, of course. I skimmed past the spate of articles about Ruth's accident. The prototype Verve, which had run itself repeatedly into the barrier. The reams of data gained from the incident seemed a little macabre in that context. Okay, right. Sorry about that. He was kind of getting in the way there. Okay, resuming. I skimmed past the spate of articles about Ruth's accident in the prototype Verve, which had run itself repeatedly into a barrier. The reams of data gained from the incident seemed a little macabre in that context. Many of the articles had been written or co-written by Ruth herself, with a weird kind of forensic detachment. Going over the car's cerebral activities second by second as it battered itself to death, oblivious of Ruth screaming her throat bloody, clawing at the straps that held her firmly to the seat. She never talked about it with the rest of us. I thought about that dichotomy for a minute, shivered, and swiped the file close. Then on to the more modern Verves, following a series of articles by anthropologists on the construction of culture and the way in which they currently develop, learning from each other, building this collective body of knowledge, as different from ours as human culture is to a cat. The varied roots of the science of autology, studying AI behavior. My own thesis, briefly reviewed. Too far forward. I skipped back. Look at what had happened to the other surviving prototypes. Mostly they'd been sold to private collectors. One was in the Smithsonian. Another in a museum in Coventry, in the UK, talking to kids, doing tricks, and generally being a hit with the public. The last prototype had sat quietly in our own research lab at the testing track until a month ago, occasionally being studied or tested, but showing no signs of distress. None that an autologist would recognize anyway. No real indication of what had made that particular car go Herbie. I swiped the tablet off. Time to talk to Ruth again. Ruth was at a workstation in her lab, writing up something, her sharp nose inclined towards a monitor screen. Got a few minutes, I asked. I'm going to pause here briefly because I've got a few people who say they've come in from the other story and want to know if this is being recorded. The answer is yes, it is. It's if you go to the reading series page and back up, you'll be able to watch it from the start, and it will be available on the BSFA Vector page and on YouTube, well, as long as they want to host it. Okay, resuming. Got a few minutes, I asked. Sure, she said. Any more thoughts on the driving Dutchman? I laughed briefly, just enough to acknowledge the joke. Not many. I wanted to ask about how those particular cars were programmed. What did they have that the others didn't? Ruth was silent a moment. I've been thinking about that one, she said. We were treating them like children, kind of. Looking at how people learn, animals learn. She rummaged through the books on the shelf in front of her and pulled out a tattered gray and blue thing the size of a file folder. I took it, puzzled. The Dream Book by Margaret Wise Brown. I looked at Ruth. It's a kid's book? She nodded. A pretty old one. She nodded again. It belonged to my grandmother when she was a girl, might even have been second-hand then. Certainly it dates back to the 1940s, maybe the 30s. She used to read it to me when I was little. Typical kids stuff, all about animals and people and what they dream about. She held it gently and opened to a page about halfway through. When we were developing the prototype verves, though, it's this verse I kept coming back to. She held it out to me. I took it and read. The little car dreams of gasoline, and red lights and green lights and roads it's seen. And under it, a second verse, beginning, a car doesn't dream, but a car might dream. Afraid the kids might anthropomorphize the car? I raised an eyebrow. I assume so, Ruth said. How times change. But it was sort of what we were doing when we were working on the prototypes, looking at how people learn through reading and then through experience and through processing that experience. What's unusual about that? I said. That's how we teach the modern ones, or rather how they teach each other. Ruth shook her head. It's a little different in their case. See, they've reached maturity as a species, if you like. They're not just artificially intelligent, they're effectively self-regulated. We just monitor the culture, make sure it's focused on what they're supposed to do, identify and fix any pathological individuals, keep an eye out for social trends. But that took about 10 years to develop, she said, pointing a stylus at me. Every new technology is based on what went before. Early computers were basically typewriters with screens. Early printed books looked like manuscripts. So these artificial cultures, she finished, were based on human ones. Simply put, of course, I said. Ruth nodded. There's a lot more to it, but that's the long and short of it. Then once you've got something that works, you start refining it, making it more and more suited to being a car. The one that crashed? I couldn't resist asking. That was before we figured out they needed processing time, she said. Her expression did not change, still quirky, deadpan. Dreaming, if you like. We noticed they spent a lot of brain idle time and tried to replace it with constant awareness. That car was the result, the equivalent of a human being who can't sleep. It went crazy, in its way. It was my fault. I wrote the program. Maybe it knew. She shrugged as though dismissing the whole horrible ideal of being trapped inside a sentient being that was trying to kill itself and her. After that, we factored in the processing periods and focused more on developing culture and less on developing knowledge. Now, of course, the processing periods are shorter and the learning processing cycles happen quickly, like microseconds, but those early ones had to have a really long downtime period. Could this be another case of a car going crazy? I asked. A car that just drives off? That's crazy enough. Could be, Ruth said. It's got processing periods, but it's still from that early batch. Hence the EMP before it does anything stupid. It's never taken any passengers. It did once, Ruth said. Just the once. Teenage girl runaway outside of Winnipeg. It slowed down, let her in, drove off. Dropped her off in Regina, apparently. Don't know why her or why there. She was pretty disturbed, but otherwise okay. Is that the signal? I pointed to an app on her screen. Ruth maximized it. Yeah, it's in Arizona at the moment, heading west. For a moment, we watched the numbers scrolling gently across the screen, map references, speeds, times. But why? Ruth shrugged. Go home, she said, in an I don't care and neither should you tone. It's past 6. Relax. Dream of gasoline or something. I wish she hadn't said that. My sleep last night was full of car dreams, red lights and green lights, and dark highways illuminated only by the glow of headlamps, trees looming on either side. Through it all, the numbers, the data, the places it went, the experiences it logged, a feeling of loneliness, of satisfaction, then the uncontrolled feeling of going, like Ruth, full tilt into the wall over and over. The next day, Ruth was waiting at my workstation, excited. It'll be here tomorrow, she said. What, the rogue prototype? Jason, don't call it that. It's not an X-Man, Ruth said. Better get that EMP generator ready. She seemed a little too happy about that, considering that she was proposing erasing the mind of a sentient being. There was something I wanted to ask, I said. There was nothing unusual about this car before it took off? Just a normal prototype? Perfectly fine, Ruth said. Nothing unusual at all. Went through the learning routines, had processing time, came back. Anything unusual about the way it processed? Not that I recall. You know the tracking app data? Could you show me which parts of the data are it awake and which are it dreaming? Ruth thought. Not at the moment, no, she said. In the beginning we could tell because we had it on a schedule, but in terms of its digital activity it's hard to tell. Like those cats in the experiment, the ones that had the locus coeruleus destroyed. They ran and jumped and chased mice in their dreams. So if the cars were sleeping, I said, how did you wake them up? You think it's asleep? And dreaming? Probably, I said. And I'm probably wrong, but we won't know for sure till we get here. Till it gets here, will we? Ruth said. The next day, Ruth and I were 3 miles along the highway from the testing track and the research facility where the car had originally been stored. We'd cycled out to avoid using any vehicle that could be damaged by the EMP. I was feeling my lack of cycling practice every inch of the way. Ruth, back injury and all, seemed okay, pushing along efficiently with her bony frame sheathed in neon lycra. A cloud of sand appeared on the horizon. That it? I asked. Ruth nodded, barely glancing up from her tablet. I took a tighter hold on the pulse generator. The cloud of sand resolved gradually into a verve. An old verve, silver gray like pewter, like the cover of Ruth's book. The company logo faded but still visible in blue on the door. Dusty, like it had never been washed. Pitted with dents. It drove towards us. I primed the generator just in case things went wrong and turned to Ruth. Ready? Ruth keyed in a new sequence, aimed the tablet at the car. We held our breath as it sped towards us. And then it slowed, stopped. After a minute, I walked towards it. I could feel the radiated heat from the engine, see the asteroid surface of the hood and doors. I walked around it, thought for a minute. You were right, Ruth said. We were right, I said. That's why it drove away. It was dreaming and it couldn't wake up. It got bored penned up at the testing track, went to sleep, restarted its processing cycle. But somehow the car equivalent of the locus coeruleus failed to kick in, so in its dream state it took a trip, driving around and around the continent to see what it could find, absorb, feed back into itself, dreaming and unable to wake up. Now it's awake again. So, Ruth said, I guess we have to take it back to base. She opened the door, climbed in with a slight groan, began to fiddle with the dashboard console. She stared at the dashboard for a moment. Then, deliberately, she pressed a button, got out of the car, stepped back. "Not going to kill another one," she said, talking to the desert. "Not going to pen another one up either, unless it wants to be penned. Cars aren't the only things that learn from experience." The car drove off. "Did you just put it back to sleep?" I said, after a shocked minute of trying to process what she'd just done. "No," she said. "I reset its cycle so it can wake and dream normally." "Then what did—" "I also made it aware of what it's been doing," she said. "Gave it a choice to come with us or go on driving around." The silence was broken only by the increasingly distant sound of wheels. "What'll we tell head office?" I asked. "We'll tell them," Ruth said, appearing to notice me again, "that we're gathering data, valuable data, on how cars process information and learn. And hell," she added, "it's viral advertising." "Let the little car dream." "Of gasoline," Ruth smiled, straddling her bike. "And red lights and green lights and roads it's seen," I completed. We rode back to the testing track together in friendly silence. Okay, well, that's the story. The little car dreams of gasoline. A few other things to say about it. You've probably guessed that the Dream book really is a real text. It is by Margaret Weiss, written in the late 1930s. You can probably find it if you look hard enough, though it's been out of print for at least half a century. But it was one that got me thinking about cars and dreaming and how car psychology works. Yeah, I'll just have a look and see about other questions. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yes, indeed, the never work with children and animals. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kevin. Another thing, for those of you who know that I tend to mentally cast my stories, fun bit of trivia, all of the early self-driving car stories and also the Noah Moyo, Willa Fitzjames mystery stories, I cast the comedians from The Daily Show and The MASH Report. This one was from The Daily Show, so if you want, you can have a fun time trying to figure out which of the comedians Jason and Ruth are actually modeled on. On a slightly less frivolous note, I've also, some of you know, done a lot of research in the car industry, and and also, some of what I was drawing on there was the things that I saw and researched at BMW. Okay, well, we've got about 2 minutes. Any more questions? Shall I let the cat back in? What do you think? Shall I let the cat back in? Go on. Okay, before I do though, if you want more links to free stories, links to where you can buy Driving Ambition, the novel that's set about 20 years after The Little Car Dreams of Gasoline, and also where you can buy my latest nonfiction work, which is the Black Archives monograph on the robots of death, you should go to my website. Okay, now that's reading. It's www.fiona-moore.com. There's also a link to my blog on there too, so you can read any other essays and flash fiction and things like that I've written. Okay, Joe Walton, yeah. Is my approach to car dreams Jungian or Freudian or activation synthesis? I'd say primarily Jungian. Most of my psychological education has been to do with behaviorists, but I tend to really like Jung and also Lacan, mainly because of the connections with culture. So I would say sort of consider when in terms of car dreaming psychologically, I would say it's Jungian, kind of the development of a culture and unconsciousness. Lacanian in that there's spillovers into how the cars live, work, and interact. And also, as I said, a certain amount of behaviorists because of the development of routines. Okay, thank you, Joe, for posting the link to the site, and I will get Zukov back in here. For those of you who don't know, yes, the cat's name really is Zukov, and he probably would be played by Jason Isaacs if there was a movie. So, hello, Zukov, say hi to your public. Yes, yes. I should also say that living with cats also informs my writing about AIs because, again, part of my touchstone is that if artificial intelligence arises, it's going to be intelligent, but it's also going to see the world in a different way. And living with cats, they're really intelligent animals, but they really, really have different priorities, different ways of seeing the world, differently shaped frontal lobes, don't you? Yeah. So, yes, hello, public, yes. Okay, well, thank you very much for, oh, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And anyway, so, well, thank you all for tuning in. And a future thank you to anyone who tunes in and watches this on YouTube or on the BSFA page. Do keep watching the BSFA Vector series. There's a lot of interesting and really good stuff coming up later. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, there are some absolutely awesome and amazing readings preceding this one. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, follow the URL in the comments or in the placard earlier. And see you online. Stay strong.